The year was 1934. Not the sleek silver screen 1934 of metropolitan towers and whispered fortunes, but the gritty, stubborn 1934 that had settled over the American heartland like a shroud of fine, choking silt. This was the era of the Dust Bowl, and the land itself felt exhausted, as if the spirit of the prairie had finally surrendered to the ceaseless wind. Ilara Vance, 22 years old and with eyes the color of faded denim, woke before the sun, as she had every day since she was 10. Her bedroom, a small square space at the back of the farmhouse, smelled perpetually of dry earth, despite her mother's tireless efforts. She could hear the wind already, a low predatory whistle outside, testing the brittle window panes. She pushed aside the thin cotton curtain. The view wasn't of rolling fields of wheat anymore, it was of a bruised ochre haze. The sun, when it finally struggled free from the horizon, would be a weak amber coin viewed through a glass of dirty water. Ilara dressed quickly in a faded calico dress and patched trousers underneath, ready for work. There was no time for dreaming, not on the Vance farm, not anymore. The kitchen, the heart of their world, was already warm with the faint metallic scent of brewing chicory coffee. Her father, Thomas, sat hunched at the oak table, his large hands curled around a mug. He was only 45, but the dust and the crushing weight of the mortgage had etched lines deep around his eyes, lines that looked like dried creek beds. "Morning, Papa," Ilara said, taking her usual place. He grunted a reply, a habit born of exhaustion. Conversation had become a luxury the Vances rarely afforded themselves. The news was always too grim to speak aloud. The radio on the shelf, a cumbersome wooden box, was silent. They couldn't bear the reports from Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas anymore, each story sounding exactly like their own, just a few miles or a few days ahead. Their land, 200 acres they had fought and sweated for, was now mostly a vast, shifting monument to their failure. The topsoil, once rich and black, was miles away, likely settling on the porches of governors in some distant green state. "The well's down another inch," Thomas announced, his voice raspy. He didn't look up, the pumps sucking air by midday. Ilara felt the familiar cold knot tighten in her stomach. Water was life. Water was the distant promise that kept them tethered to this failing soil. Without it, they were just waiting for the final dusty eviction notice. Her younger brother, 15-year-old Toby, shuffled in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was skinny and taller than his age, but the farm work hadn't put muscle on him, only a stoic resignation. "I'll take the wagon out today, Papa," Toby offered, his voice cracking slightly. "See if Mr. Henderson will trade us some of his alfalfa hay for the last of that broken fencing wire." "He won't," Thomas said flatly. "Henderson's got 3 children to feed, and he can't spare a scrap of feed or a foot of wire. He's looking at the same wall we are." Ilara stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Then I'll go into town. I heard Mrs. Albright is still hiring girls to do laundry for the railway men passing through. It's hard work, but it's real coin. Not credit, not trade." Her father finally looked at her. His eyes held a weary pride. "That walk's 7 miles, Ilara, and you'll bring back enough dust in your lungs to bury a mule." "I've got stronger lungs than a mule," she replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "And the promise of $1 is a strong lure." The distant promise was the only thing holding them together. It wasn't the promise of rain. No one trusted the sky anymore. It was the promise of surviving one more week, one more month, of keeping the bank from taking the land that held the bones of their ancestors and their future hopes. Ilara grabbed her canvas satchel and stepped out of the back door. She paused on the porch, pulling her bandana up over her nose and mouth, the standard uniform of the plains. The farm lay before her, a landscape both intimately familiar and tragically alien. The stalks of dead corn rattled like dry bones in the wind. The fence posts were almost completely buried under crescent-shaped drifts of fine, dark brown dust. She could almost remember the smell of fresh-turned earth, the sweet scent of clover, the sound of rain on the tin roof. Those memories felt like the true fiction now. She started down the rutted track, the dust immediately stinging her exposed skin. She wasn't walking on soil.
She was walking on air and history. Every step was a declaration that she refused to be buried by the land she loved. About half a mile down the road, she passed the Peterson homestead, or what was left of it. The Petersons had left last month, loading their meager possessions onto a rusted-out Ford Model T, heading west towards the shimmering, mythical lands of California. They had sold everything for gas money, their despair a heavy, unspoken thing. The house stood hollow now, the windows broken, offering no resistance to the wind. The site was a constant, terrifying reminder of their own proximity to ruin. "Go west," whispered the desperate papers, promising work in green valleys. "Go west," whispered the wind, urging them to scatter. But Thomas Vance was a man of the soil, unyielding in his loyalty, even to a soil that now sought to betray and consume him. Ilara knew her father would stay until the bank dragged him, kicking and screaming, off the property. And if he stayed, she stayed. The sun had risen fully now, a weak ball of fire obscured by the perpetual haze. As she walked, a massive black blizzard, a towering wall of dust began to form on the horizon, moving with unnatural speed towards the town. It wasn't rain, it was an omen, a physical manifestation of the depression's relentless cruelty. Ilara quickened her pace. She had to reach town before the storm did. She had to earn that dollar. She had to bring home that distant promise before the dust swallowed them whole. The walk was grueling. Her lungs burned beneath the cloth, her eyes watered, and her feet kicked up plumes of the very thing she was trying to escape. $1, she thought, for a day of breathing poison. It was the exchange they had been forced to make, the price of survival in this broken land. And as the ominous black cloud began to obscure the sky, transforming the day into a premature twilight, Ilara focused on the image of a crisp, clean dollar bill, a small, tangible promise in a world dissolving into dust.
The town of Havenwood was a deceptive name for a place that offered no refuge. When Ilara finally reached the outskirts, the black blizzard she had seen forming on the horizon hit with the impact of a physical blow. It was a suffocating curtain of wind and grit that reduced visibility to a few feet, turning the midday into midnight. Ilara ducked into the lee of the general store, pulling her shawl over her head. The fine dust worked its way into every crease of her clothing, grit between her teeth, and a dry, persistent cough in her lungs. This was the omnipresent reality of the 1930s plain, a relentless, invisible oppressor that was far more effective than any armed guard. The small personal problem that had driven her here was a simple one, a broken plowshare. It was a minor item, yet its breakage represented the collapse of their fragile self-sufficiency. Without it, Thomas Vance couldn't even try to scratch a crop from the exhausted earth, meaning they had no collateral and no hope for the immediate future. The cost of a replacement, $3, was a chasm they could not cross. Her destination was the railway yard, and specifically, the makeshift laundry shed run by Mrs. Albright. She pushed through the store's swinging doors and found herself in a small, crowded space where farmers and their wives waited out the storm. The air was thick with the smell of old wood, unwashed bodies, and the underlying scent of fear. Seated by the potbelly stove were two men she recognized immediately, Mr. Silas Thorne, the local bank manager, and Deputy Dale Coster, the sheriff's younger, heavier cousin. They represented the heavy hand in Havenwood, the bureaucratic and legal apparatus that was slowly dismantling the lives of the farming families. Thorne, dressed in a surprisingly clean, if slightly wrinkled suit, was speaking in a low, oily tone. "It's just the unfortunate reality, fellas," Thorne was saying, gesturing with a damp cigar. "The bank isn't heartless, but the Federal Land Bank wants its due. Loans are being called. If the collateral, the land itself, can't produce, then we have to liquidate. It's just the arithmetic of the matter." Ilara's stomach twisted. The Vance farm mortgage was held by Thorne's bank. She lowered her head, hoping the dust covering her face made her unrecognizable, and hurried toward the back door that led to the yards. She found Mrs. Albright wrestling a huge sack of railway uniforms out of a battered truck. The older woman, stout and perpetually perspiring, nodded sharply at Alara. "You're late, Vance," though not unkindly. "But this storm's been a monster. Get inside. The steam boiler's running and I've got a pile of engine grease that needs scrubbing. I'll pay you 50 cents for the day and not a penny more." 50 cents. Less than a third of what she needed for the plowshare. But it was something. The laundry shed was a stifling, humid inferno. The heat came not just from the fire beneath the boiler, but from the immense labor of scrubbing heavy cotton and wool uniforms soiled with coal dust and oil. Alara tied her apron tight and immediately set to work on a soaking tub, her arms plunging into water that was almost scalding. The personal problem, the broken plowshare, was instantly mirrored in the broader historical issue of labor exploitation and desperation. Alara knew 50 cents was criminally low, even for 1934, but Mrs. Albright held all the power. The line of women seeking this miserable, lung-searing work stretched around the corner. If Alara complained, she would be instantly replaced by someone even more desperate. As she scrubbed, her mind reeled with the implications of the plowshare. If they couldn't replace it, Thomas would try to use the old wooden hand plow, a tool meant for small vegetable patches, not acres of tough, drought-hardened land. It would break him, physically and mentally. The heavy hand of the land, of the economy, was reaching out to crush her father's will. Around mid-morning, a small incident occurred that brought the oppression into sharp focus. A young boy, no older than 10, came into the shed, clutching a small glass jar. "Mrs. Albright," the boy stammered, holding out the jar. "Mama sent this. It's all we have left. Please, can you trade it for a piece of soap? Just enough to clean Pa's shirt for Sunday?" The jar contained a thin, pale honey, the last remnants of the family's bee box. Mrs. Albright barely glanced at it. "Honey? What am I going to do with a teaspoon of thin honey, son? I need cash! Next!" The boy's face crumpled. He stood paralyzed for a moment, the small offering trembling in his hand, before turning and running back into the dark dust storm. Alara's heart ached with a sharp, familiar pain. The boy's humiliation, the attempt to barter a last cherished item for the basic necessity of soap, was the small personal problem of this boy's family, and the ruthless refusal, the demand for cold hard coin, was the larger historical issue of the Depression, where currency had replaced community and human dignity was a negligible trading commodity. She worked harder, faster. Her knuckles scraped raw on the washboard. She thought, this is how they break us, not with clubs, but with exhaustion and impossible prices. In the late afternoon, just as the dust began to settle slightly, Silas Thorne walked into the shed, accompanied by Deputy Coster. Thorne wasn't there for laundry. He was there for a more sinister reason. He spotted Alara immediately. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice carrying the forced cordiality of a snake. Alara stopped scrubbing, her hands dripping lye soap and grime. "Mr. Thorne?" "I was just looking for your father, but I suppose you'll do. Just wanted to offer a friendly word of advice. The installment for May is overdue. The bank can hold off until the end of the week, but then, well, the law is the law. The bank must exercise its legal rights." The subtext was clear. We are coming for your land. This was the heavy hand resting squarely on her family's neck. Alara swallowed, tasting dust and fear. "My father is doing everything he can, Mr. Thorne. The dust has ruined the soil. It's an act of God." Thorne smiled, a chilling, practiced gesture that never reached his eyes. "The Almighty doesn't sign the mortgage papers, Miss Vance. Your father did. We are sympathetic, truly, but this is business. Perhaps if you brought in some of your mother's canning. Pears, maybe? We could count it toward a small portion of the interest." It was an insult, a demand for charity, disguised as a business transaction, trading generations of land ownership for a jar of preserved fruit. But it also showed the extent of their desperation. Thorne knew they were trading everything to survive. "We have no pears left, Mr. Thorne," Alara said, holding his gaze steadily, though her knees were trembling. "Only dust." Deputy Coster shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. He was merely the enforcer, the muscle that made Thorne's arithmetic stick. Thorne shrugged, satisfied that his message had been delivered. "Well, that's a pity. Good day to you, Miss Vance, and please tell your father not to make this difficult. It never ends well when people fight the numbers." As they left, the shed seemed to shrink around Alara. The personal problem, the broken plowshare, was no longer just an issue of $3. It was a race against the bank. If she didn't find the money this week, Thorne would win. The plowshare was the key to their last feeble attempt at self-rescue. At the end of the long, back-breaking day, Mrs. Albright counted 50 cents into Alara's grime-stained hand. "Good work, Alara," the woman said, counting out the coins. "Same time tomorrow." Alara nodded, her throat tight. 50 cents. She needed $2.50 more. As she started the long, weary walk back to the farm, the sun had fully set, and the plains were silent, save for the persistent, mournful whisper of the wind. She hadn't earned enough for the plowshare, and she had received a chilling eviction warning. The quiet life was now a ticking clock, and the heavy hand was poised to strike. She clutched the coins tight. She had survived the day, but the battle was far from won. The injustice was not in the labor, but in the system that made her labor nearly worthless. How do you fight arithmetic, she wondered, kicking dust as she walked. How do you fight a piece of paper signed years ago that now demands your very soul?
The moon was a sickly, pale sliver, fighting its way through the residual haze of the dust storm when Alara finally reached the Vance farmhouse. The kerosene lamp burning in the kitchen window was a lonely beacon, and the sight of it, coupled with the knowledge that Thorne was circling, filled her with a fierce, protective resolve. She found her father, Thomas, sitting exactly where she had left him, staring at the scarred oak tabletop. Toby was mending a harness by the firelight, his young brows furrowed in concentration. "I got 50 cents, Papa," Alara announced, dropping the coins with a hollow clink onto the table. "And I saw Silas Thorne in town." Thomas didn't move, but the muscle in his jaw twitched. What did the banker have to say? "He gave us until the end of the week for the May installment. He mentioned the law and his legal rights. He's coming for the land, Papa, unless we can buy ourselves another month." Toby stopped working, his eyes wide. "The end of the week? But that's only 3 days." A heavy silence descended. 3 days to find $3. No, now $2.50. It felt like asking for a miracle in a time when God seemed to have turned his back on the Great Plains. "I'll go to Reverend Hayes," Thomas said finally, his voice flat with defeat. "Maybe the church fund, the charity collection." Alara shook her head quickly. "No, Papa, not the church. They have enough mouths to feed, and we are Vances. We don't beg." Her refusal was rooted in the fierce established tradition of the Vance family, self-sufficiency and stoic pride. In their world, charity was a mark of absolute failure, a surrender of one's dignity. This belief in rugged individualism, the once an essential part of the American frontier spirit, now felt like a dangerous liability in the face of mass economic collapse. This was the first minor event that challenged her beliefs. Their pride might cost them their home. "Then what, Alara?" Thomas asked, the raw exhaustion in his voice sounding like a plea. "You got any better ideas?" Alara looked down at the 50 cents. "I'm going to see Old Man Hemlock tomorrow." Toby gasped. "The Hemlock place? Papa, she can't. Nobody goes there. He's crazy." Thomas frowned.
his posture shifting slightly from resignation to cautious interest. Old Man Hemlock, whose real name was Phineas, was the ultimate embodiment of the old guard in Havenwood. He was a relic of the true homesteading era, a man who had arrived in the territory 50 years before the Vances. He was a retired blacksmith and carpenter who lived completely outside the town's economy, surviving off his own isolated, strangely fertile patch of land on the edge of the creek bottom, a place the dust never quite managed to reach. The superstition was that Hemlock had made a bargain with the creek spirits. The more pragmatic belief was that he was simply eccentric and refused to deal with the bank, the government, or the world beyond his small forge. "He doesn't use money, Alara," Thomas said, shaking his head. "He trades, and he trades for things that are unusual. What do you have to offer him?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But he doesn't answer to Thorn, and he doesn't obey the calendar. He is free, and freedom is what we need right now. I'll offer him a week of hard labor, scraping, cleaning, whatever he needs." Thomas was silent for a long time, chewing on the idea. Alara saw the flickering hope in his eyes, a hope so fragile it felt like cruelty to name it. "He's a hard man, Alara, but he's fair in his own way. Be respectful, go early, and for heaven's sake, don't mention the bank." The next morning, Alara set out before the dawn was even a faint promise. The Hemlock place was 3 miles in the opposite direction from town, nestled deep in the creek's protective hollow. She found the property surrounded, not by dusty wasteland, but by a thicket of gnarled black walnut trees, their leaves miraculously green. The house was a tumble-down affair, the original log cabin extended with rough sawn lumber. The air here was cool and damp, and for the first time in months, Alara could smell soil, not just dust. The old man was already at his forge, the rhythmic clang of his hammer echoing through the hollow. He was huge, even hunched over the anvil, with shoulders like the walnut trees, and a white beard tangled with wisps of gray wool. Alara stood quietly, waiting for him to acknowledge her. The old guard operated on its own time, with its own rituals. After several minutes, Phineas Hemlock lowered his hammer and turned. His eyes were startlingly blue, and they scrutinized her with an unnerving intensity that saw past the dusty clothes and straight to her desperation. "Vance, girl," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. "What brings a clean-faced young woman to the dirtiest corner of Havenwood? Lost your way back to civilization?" "I know exactly where I am, Mr. Hemlock. I came to ask for a trade." He wiped his hands on a dirty apron. "Trade is dead, girl. The bank owns the coins and the land. They killed trade with their ledgers." "Not here," Alara countered, gesturing to the vibrant, sheltered hollow. "Here, you still own the soil. I need $3 to fix a broken plowshare, to buy my family another month of life before the bank takes our farm." The old man snorted. $3, the currency of fools. "And what do you offer me, Alara Vance? Gold? Silver? You look like you haven't eaten properly in a month." "I offer a week of my labor. I'll clean your shop, chop your wood, milk your cow, whatever you need. Hard, honest work." Hemlock leaned against the anvil, his huge hands crossed. "Hard work. That's all you people ever talk about. You Vances, you Thomas kind. You think if you just work harder, the land will love you back. That's your established tradition, isn't it? The stubborn belief in your own 2 hands?" He tapped the anvil with a thick finger. "Look at this. I've worked a forge for 50 years. I worked harder than any man in this county. But I knew when to stop hitting the metal. You keep hitting a dead piece of iron, it shatters. You keep working dead land, it swallows you." This was the minor event that challenged her beliefs. Her entire life had been built on the principle of unyielding labor. To hear the old guard, the embodiment of the pioneer spirit, dismiss it as futile was jarring. "So you're saying we should just surrender?" she asked, her voice tight with offense. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I'm saying you need to be smarter than the numbers. You're fighting the wind with the broom, girl. I don't need your labor. I need things you don't have." He then pointed to a worn wooden box tucked beside the forge. "I need a certain kind of wood, a piece of juniper root harvested at the dark of the moon, carved to a specific pattern. I need the dried scales of a snapping turtle, which only Toby could find. That is what I trade for, not sweat." Alara felt a sudden, crushing wave of defeat. He wasn't rejecting her. He was mocking the very idea of honest, simple labor as a means of exchange in this broken world. "I don't know how to find magic roots, Mr. Hemlock. I only know how to work." The old man sighed, like a dry leaf scattering. "You're too proud, Alara Vance. You are too much your father's daughter, and that pride is going to cost you your farm." He walked to a shelf and picked up a heavy, strangely ornate piece of metalwork, an ancient, hand-forged hinge, clearly worth more than $3.
There are two ways to deal with a heavy hand, girl. You can be the unyielding soil, and eventually the hammer will crack you. Or you can be the shifting creek and flow around it. He placed the hinge in her hand. It was cold and heavy. "Take this. It's not a loan, it's a test. You go into town, you take this to old Mr. Goldfarb at the pawn shop. He will give you exactly $3 for it. No more, no less. He trusts my work. You pay your bank, then you think. You think about what you have to do to get out from under their heavy hand, instead of just waiting for the next blow." Alara stared at the heavy metal, stunned. "But what do I owe you, Mr. Hemlock?" "The hinge will be payment for your shattered beliefs," he grumbled. "I want you to come back here next week, not to work, but to listen. I want you to tell me what you plan to do, truly plan to do, not just to survive, but to escape this town's trap. If your answer is just work harder, then you owe me $3. If your answer shows me you've learned to be the creek instead of the stone, then you owe me nothing." Alara left the hemlock hollow with the heavy, cold hinge secured in her satchel, the $3 already feeling tangible. She had the money, but her world had been subtly undermined. The old guard hadn't offered her charity or labor. He had offered her a change in philosophy. Her family's pride, their faith in simple hard work, the very traditions that had defined them, had been branded as their fatal flaw. The quiet life they treasured was being maintained only by the eccentric mercy of a hermit who believed the only way to beat the system was to stop playing by its rules entirely. Alara walked the 3 miles back into Havenwood with Hemlock's heavy, ornate hinge tucked securely in her satchel. The metal felt cold and dense, a paradox of grace and sheer utility. It represented not just $3, but a temporary reprieve, a week bought by abandoning her family's most cherished tradition of uncompromising self-reliance. She headed straight for the pawn shop, a dusty, dimly lit store run by an old Jewish man named Mr. Goldfarb, who was as much a fixture of the town as the endless wind. The transaction was swift and silent. Goldfarb weighed the hinge in his hand, nodded once, and counted $3 silver into her palm. He knew the craftsmanship and he knew Hemlock, no questions asked. With the $3 tight in her fist, Alara felt a surge of adrenaline. The first task was complete. She had outsmarted Thorn, at least for a few days. She hurried to the Havenwood Mercantile Bank, her boots kicking up the still settling dust. Silas Thorn was at his high, brass-railed desk, meticulously counting a stack of banknotes with the focused intensity of a miser. Alara walked right up to the desk. "Mr. Thorn, I'm here to pay the May installment." Thorn stopped counting and looked up, his face a mask of disappointment. He clearly hadn't expected to see her again until he was repossessing the furniture. "Miss Vance," he said, forcing a weary smile. "Promptness is commendable, but late nonetheless. There's a 50-cent late fee, of course." Ilara's heart sank. 50 cents. The very 50 cents she had earned scrubbing railway grease. She pulled out the coins she'd worked for. "I have the 50 cents here, Mr. Thorn," she said, placing her hard-won earnings on the desk. and the $3. She added the silver coins from the pawn shop. Thorne scooped up the money, counted it precisely, and scribbled a receipt. Very good. You're clear until the 1st of June. Try to be more punctual, Miss Vance. The bank cannot afford to be flexible. Ilara took the receipt. It was thin, flimsy paper, but it represented the immediate survival of her family. She had bought them time. As she turned to leave, a commotion erupted outside. The sound of shouting, the clatter of metal, and the unmistakable panicked braying of farm animals. This was the bolt. Ilara ran out of the bank. The street was clogged with dust-covered farmers. Deputy Coaster, Thorne's heavy-handed enforcer, was standing guard over 2 battered flatbed trucks. Piled high on the trucks were the seized possessions of the town's oldest Polish immigrant family, the Kowalskis. But it wasn't just furniture. Tied up haphazardly in the back of one truck was the Kowalskis' only cow, a small bony Jersey, and their mule, the animal that pulled their last working cultivator. Mr. Kowalski, a man whose back was permanently bowed from a life of labor, stood on the sidewalk, his wife sobbing into his shoulder. "Deputy, that mule is not collateral. We need her to work the plot. It's all we have left," Kowalski pleaded, his voice ragged and thick with Polish accent. Coaster, puffed up with the authority of his badge, simply adjusted his hat. "Mr. Thorne has determined your assets must be liquidated to cover the interest, Mr. Kowalski. You defaulted on the April payment. The law is the law." The implication was horrific. Thorne hadn't just called in the Kowalskis' mortgage, he was seizing their essential tools of survival, effectively guaranteeing that the family would be unable to plant a crop, forcing them into certain ruin and likely homelessness. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. This was not the simple, clean arithmetic Thorne had preached. This was deliberate cruelty, a tactic designed to break families quickly and completely, ensuring the bank gained possession of the land sooner rather than later. She walked straight to Deputy Coaster. This was the moment she was pushed out of her comfort zone and into the core conflict. She was no longer fighting for a receipt, she was fighting for a principle, the right of a man to keep the tools necessary to feed his family. "Deputy," Ilara said, her voice shaking slightly but steady. "The Kowalskis' loan was for the land and the machinery, not for livestock they depend on for daily sustenance. You can't seize their mule and their cow. It's un-American." Coaster turned his cold, professional stare on her. "This is none of your business, Miss Vance. Step aside." "It is my business when the bank breaks the spirit of the law," she insisted, planting her feet firmly on the dusty ground. "They need those animals to work the land so they can pay the bank. You're guaranteeing their failure." Coaster gave a harsh, short laugh. "Don't preach the law to me, girl. Mr. Thorne holds the deed of trust. He dictates the terms of the seizure. Now step aside, or I'll charge you with obstruction." Suddenly, a voice cut through the tense confrontation. "The girl is right, Deputy." It was an unexpected voice, that of Mr. Goldfarb, the pawn shop owner, who had followed Ilara out of his store. He stood on the edge of the crowd, his face etched with worry, holding the heavy hinge Ilara had traded. "The law of seizure, even under a deed of trust, has precedence," Goldfarb said, slowly walking toward them. "You must leave enough assets for the debtor to continue trade or husbandry to settle the debt. Taking the mule and the cow is excessive levy, and it is illegal, Coster." The crowd murmured. Goldfarb, a quiet man who rarely spoke up, had invoked the legal argument that none of the desperate farmers dared to use. Coster was momentarily flustered. "You keep out of this, Jew. This is county business." Thorne emerged from the bank, his face red with anger. "The assets are listed under the general clause of collateral. Load them up, Deputy, before I call the state police." Ilara saw her chance. Goldfarb had given her the legal language. Hemlock had taught her to be the shifting creek, not the unyielding stone. She couldn't fight Coster with strength, but she could fight him with the very same bureaucratic weapons he wielded. "Mr. Thorne, if you take that cow, the Kowalskis will be unable to make milk, which is their source of food and trade.
Alara stated loudly, addressing the growing crowd. "That's why the law protects such essential assets. You will be held personally liable for a wrongful seizure of necessities, and Mr. Goldfarb here will testify." The mere threat of litigation, of a drawn-out, expensive legal fight, was a bolt from the blue for Thorne. His power relied on the absolute compliance and fear of the desperate. He couldn't afford a public legal challenge that might set a precedent for every other defaulting farmer. Thorne glared at Goldfarb, then at Alara, recognizing the intelligent defiance in her eyes. She wasn't just a scared farm girl anymore, she was a threat. "Fine," Thorne spat, gesturing furiously at Coster. "Leave the livestock. Take the wagon and the furniture, but leave the mule and the cow." Coster, defeated, reluctantly untied the rope holding the two animals, throwing the rope back at Mr. Kowalski. As the trucks rumbled away with the Kowalskis' meager belongings, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind a silence, thick with shock and a faint, hesitant hope. Alara felt weak, trembling from the confrontation, but victorious. She had stood up to the heavy hand and for a moment made it retreat. Mr. Kowalski walked over to Alara, his eyes wet. He tried to speak, but only managed a choked whisper. "Go to the Kowalski's place tonight," Goldfarb whispered to Alara, taking her aside. "Bring them some food. They'll need it. And Alara, listen to me. You just stepped onto the wrong side of the line. Thorne will not forget this. You're not just a debtor now, you're an enemy. You gave these people an idea, the idea that they can fight back." Alara looked down at the receipt in her hand, her temporary security. She had paid the bank, but the payment had cost her something far more valuable than $3, her anonymity. She realized with chilling clarity that this incident, this bolt from the blue, had changed everything. She could no longer just work harder and keep her head down. She had been publicly recognized as a defender of the oppressed, and she was now directly antagonistic to Silas Thorne, the local agent of the large-scale financial oppression. Hemlock's challenge echoed in her mind. "I want you to tell me what you plan to do to escape this town's trap." Her plan could no longer be a purely defensive one. Her small personal problem, the plowshare mortgage, had fully merged with the larger historical conflict, economic exploitation, and bureaucratic tyranny. She looked back at the bank, the symbol of the quiet but persistent oppression. The fight for the Vance farm had just become a fight for the soul of Havenwood. Alara Vance had bought her family a month of life, but she had bought herself a war.
The air in the Vance farmhouse that evening was thick with unease. Alara had returned not just with the receipt for the May installment, but with the terrifying, exhilarating news of her confrontation with Silas Thorne. The fight was no longer a personal, quiet struggle. It was a public declaration. Thomas Vance looked at his daughter with a complicated mix of pride and fear. "You saved the mule, Alara. That was a fine thing you did. But Goldfarb is right. Thorne wouldn't forget that. We've painted a target on our back." "We already had a target, Papa," Alara retorted, her adrenaline still high. "We just refused to let him shoot yet. The question is, what now? Hemlock said we can't just work harder. We have to be smarter." Thomas simply shook his head, retreating back into his weariness. The old guard's traditional way, hard work and silence, was the only method he knew, even if it was failing. Alara knew she couldn't rely on him to devise a new strategy. She needed counsel from the outside world. The next morning, she walked to town not to work, but to consult her unexpected confidant, Mr. Goldfarb. She found him in his dim pawn shop, polishing a tarnished silver locket with intense focus. The scent of old brass, wood polish, and something vaguely medicinal hung in the air. "I expected you, Miss Vance," Goldfarb said, not looking up. "Please close the door. We don't need ears." Alara sat on a dusty stool. "I need to know what you know, Mr. Goldfarb. About Thorne? About the law? You risked yourself yesterday for the Kowalskis." "Risk is the currency of survival, Alara. My people have always known that. I spoke up because I know what happens when men like Thorne are allowed to take the essentials of life. It's not business,
It's dispossession. It's how they break the spirit before they take the land. He leaned closer. You asked about the law. Thorne is the bank's local agent, but the power comes from above, from the Federal Land Bank, the large corporations that hold the debt. They don't want your land for farming. They want it for the cheap labor that comes when you're desperate, and for the mineral rights beneath the soil. The mortgage is just a tool to strip your assets. He paused, then added a shocking detail. The bank is selling all the seized land in large blocks to an investment consortium from Chicago. They don't want small farms. They want industrial operations. This revelation was profound. Ilara had thought they were fighting poor weather. They were actually fighting industrial capitalism. Her small farm was a casualty in a much bigger corporate war. So how do we fight that? Ilara asked, her voice barely a whisper. We're just farmers. Goldfarb reached under the counter and pulled out a plain, sealed envelope. It was thick, heavier than an ordinary letter. The front was addressed simply to the farmers of Havenwood. What is it? She asked, her hand hovering over it. This was the moment of initial hesitation, the choice between the safety of ignorance and the danger of knowledge. It is a whisper of solidarity, Goldfarb said, a call to form a farmers' union, to organize a mortgage resistance. It suggests collective negotiation, political lobbying, and possibly a coordinated, non-violent response to evictions. They call it the Farmers' Holiday Association, a movement gaining traction in the North. Ilara felt a sudden chill despite the heat of the day. Organization, collective action, that was entirely outside the Vance tradition of solitary struggle. It meant depending on others, trusting strangers, and publicly declaring war on the system that supported Havenwood's entire power structure. It meant committing to a cause that might land her and her father in jail. Union? My father would never agree. He thinks unions are for factory workers and agitators. He says they breed radicals. Your father's pride will cost him his land, Ilara, Goldfarb insisted, his voice gentle but firm. The banks are organized, the government is organized, the storm is organized. You cannot face it alone. This letter is the difference between fighting as individuals and fighting as an army. It's the difference between staying here and joining the tide of people fleeing west.
He had hit the core conflict. The secret appeal challenged her entire ideological inheritance. Her belief system said, work alone, trust your family. The letters said, trust your neighbor, fight together. Ilara picked up the envelope. It felt heavy with responsibility. Why give it to me, Mr. Goldfarb? Why not the sheriff or the reverend? The sheriff works for Thorne. The reverend prays for charity when we need revolution. And you, Ilara Vance, you stood up to Coster for a Polish man's mule. You have courage, but more importantly, you have fire. You are the one who has already crossed the line. Ilara finally broke the seal. Inside, the typewritten words were crisp, precise, and radical. It outlined a meeting place, an abandoned schoolhouse 10 miles west, and a time, 4 nights from now. It spoke of penny auctions, a coordinated resistance tactic where farmers bid ridiculously low prices on seized property to return it to the original owners, and collective bargaining with the land bank. It was an unmistakable call to the core conflict, not just paying the mortgage, but dismantling the system that made the mortgage unjust. Ilara read the letter twice, her mind spinning with the implications. If she attended this meeting, she would become an agitator, a radical. If she didn't, the Vances, the Kowalskis, and every other struggling family in Havenwood would be picked off one by one. She refolded the letter and looked up at Goldfarb. What if it's a trap? What if Thorne finds out? They could charge us with sedition. Yes, Goldfarb acknowledged simply. They could. That's the price of a future, Ilara. Fear is the greatest weapon of the oppressor. You decide if you will let it keep you quiet.
Alara spent the rest of the day in a state of agitation. She went to the barn to look at the broken plowshare, the initial small problem that had set her on this path. It was a physical reminder of the heavy hand of necessity. She had the $3 for the repair, but now she understood that repairing the plow was pointless if the whole farm was soon to be swallowed up by a Chicago consortium. She needed to consult one more person, one who understood the consequences of public action and the nature of the local establishment, Old Man Hemlock. She walked the familiar path to his secluded hollow that evening. Hemlock was oiling his tools, the scent of linseed oil a welcome contrast to the dust. Alara handed him the unsigned letter. He took it, his huge, calloused hands unfolding the paper with surprising delicacy. He read it once, his blue eyes moving quickly over the words. Farmers' Holiday Association. I remember their fathers' movements. Good, foolish men. They think organization will save them. You told me to be smarter than the numbers. This is smarter. This is collective power. The bank fears an army, not a lone farmer. He tossed the letter into the glowing coals of his forge. Alara gasped, leaping forward, but the paper curled and blackened instantly. You don't need the letter, Alara. You already read the words. And the words are good, but the old guard will crush you. The local establishment, Thorne, the sheriff, the local politicians, they are cogs in a machine. You fight them, and they are easily replaced. You must fight the idea of organization itself. He pulled the flaming paper out with tongs. It was reduced to ash. The risk is not sedition, Alara. The risk is betrayal. There is always a Judas in the room, someone who is too afraid to fight and thinks silence will save them. You go to that meeting. You listen. But you don't put your faith in a secret army. You put your faith in the courage you saw in Goldfarb's eyes and the fire you saw in your own reflection. Go and see if there are enough brave hearts to be the tide. He had confirmed the danger, but endorsed the necessity of the appeal. He had pushed her to accept the core conflict. Alara Vance was to become the eyes and ears of the resistance, the reluctant revolutionary. As she walked home under the cold, watchful stars, Alara had made her decision. She would go to the abandoned schoolhouse. She would accept the secret appeal. She would move beyond the quiet life of individual struggle and join the larger, terrifying, and necessary war against the forces that sought to strip the American farmer of dignity and land. The unsigned letter had been destroyed, but the call to action was etched into her mind. She was no longer just fighting for a plowshare. She was fighting for the unyielding soil itself.
The abandoned schoolhouse was 10 miles west of Havenwood, a forgotten structure listing on a barren rise of land that marked the unofficial boundary between the county's debt-ridden farms and the vast, empty tracts owned by absentee speculators. For Alara Vance, the journey was not just a matter of distance. It was a passage across an ideological frontier. It was 4 nights after she received the unsigned letter. The moon was obscured by high, fast-moving clouds, leaving the plains in an oppressive, dusty darkness. She rode their oldest mare, Bess, not wanting to risk the noise of the wagon. She wore her oldest trousers, a heavy coat against the late-night chill, and kept the receipt from Thorne's bank, her family's precious, temporary safety, tucked deep inside her pocket. Every shadow seemed to hold the outline of Deputy Coster. Every gust of wind sounded like the distant approach of a bank-owned Ford Model A. Fear was the first major test she faced, the chilling realization that by attending this meeting, she was transforming from a desperate debtor into a political dissident. She was crossing the boundary line of passive survival into active resistance. She reached the schoolhouse shortly before the agreed-upon time of 10 o'clock. The building was little more than a single dark room, its windows mostly shattered.
The only sign of life was a faint, wavering kerosene light visible through a crack in the boarded-up doorway. Alara tied Bess to a broken fence post and approached the schoolhouse cautiously. She paused at the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was alone, committed to the collective, but utterly isolated in her fear. The Vance pride, the belief in unyielding soil and solitary labor, screamed at her to turn back, to go home and rely on the receipt in her pocket. "Be the creek, not the stone," Hemlock's voice echoed in her mind. "Listen." She knocked lightly, a sequence of 2 quick taps and a long pause, as indicated by a hastily scrawled note she found tucked into the doorframe. The door creaked open, revealing a large, imposing figure. He was a man in his late 40s with a square jaw, wearing a dark canvas jacket and a determined, wary expression. "Who sent you?" the man asked, his voice low and firm. "Mr. Goldfarb. He said I should come to understand how to fight the numbers," Alara whispered. The man studied her, a young woman, alone, dressed for farm work, not politics. He clearly hadn't expected a woman, or anyone so young. "Inside, quickly. We don't have much time." Alara stepped inside, and the door was immediately barred behind her. The room was illuminated by 2 sputtering lamps, casting long, nervous shadows. There were 15 people gathered, all men save for a stout, gray-haired woman named Martha, who ran the small local diner. They were farmers, laborers, and small business owners from Havenwood and the surrounding townships, the very people Silas Thorne was trying to break. She recognized many faces, including the deeply worried Mr. Kowalski, whose mule she had saved. The man who had opened the door, who was introduced as Frank Miller, a farmer from the next county, and the organizer of the meeting, stood by the chalkboard. "Welcome, friends. I apologize for the necessary secrecy, but the banks are watching. The government does not look kindly on organized protest against property laws. Tonight, we form the Havenwood chapter of the Farmers Holiday Association. We are here to fight fire with fire, to fight organized wealth with organized solidarity." Miller's voice, though quiet, was filled with conviction that ignited the spark of hope Alara had been searching for. He outlined the strategy from the letter: collective resistance, political pressure, and the tactic of penny auctions. The tension in the room, however, was palpable. Many of the men, like Alara's father, were deeply uncomfortable with the concept of a union. They were the old guard, steeped in the tradition of fighting their own battles. The first major test for Alara arrived swiftly, not from the outside, but from within the group. An older farmer named Mr. Henderson, a man known for his perpetual complaining, stood up, his face pale with anxiety. "Mr. Miller, this is foolishness. We're talking about breaking the law. If we hold one of these penny auctions and stop a bank seizure, Thorne will come back with the state police. They'll take our land and throw us in jail. We can't beat the bank. We just need to pray for rain." Miller tried to calm him, arguing that without a stand, they were doomed anyway. But Henderson's fear was contagious. His hesitation mirrored the fear that Alara had fought on the 10-mile ride. Suddenly, a voice cut through the nervous argument, Alara's own. She hadn't planned to speak, but the desperation in Henderson's voice forced her hand. "Mr. Henderson, with all due respect, the bank is already breaking the law," Alara said, stepping forward. All eyes in the room turned to her, shocked by the audacity of a young woman speaking out of turn. "They took Mr. Kowalski's mule," she continued, speaking clearly and referencing the event that had served as her inciting incident. "They used the law as a weapon of dispossession." "You speak of the law, girl," Henderson retorted, scoffing. "What do you know of the law? You're just a farm girl." Alara reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled bank receipt, the proof of her survival and the symbol of her temporary victory. "I know what I saw," she insisted, And I know that when I spoke the truth of the law, when I stood up to Coster and Thorne, they backed down. They left the mule and the cow. They didn't retreat because of rain. They retreated because I broke their simple arithmetic with organized truth. This is not an organization of radicals, Mr. Henderson. This is an organization of common sense to ensure we keep the essentials that allow us to pay our debt. Her impromptu speech was raw, passionate, and deeply personal. It resonated because it was a first-hand account of defiance, not theory. It was the first major test of her leadership, and she passed it. Miller smiled faintly, looking impressed. She's right. The bank preys on isolation and fear. Together, we can call their bluff. A wave of assent went through the room. Ilara's courage had calmed the room's anxiety. Then Miller began to outline the specific, immediate strategy. The land bank is scheduled to evict the McDonald family next Tuesday. They live near the creek bottom, a crucial piece of land the land bank wants for the Chicago Consortium. We will meet on the road Tuesday morning. We will use the tactic of the penny auction to buy back the McDonald's property and give it back to them. And if that fails, we will form a human chain around their house to prevent the sheriff from gaining entry. Ilara felt the gravity of the decision. Blocking a sheriff was a direct confrontation, a line in the sand. This was exactly the kind of direct action her father would condemn as foolish. As the meeting wrapped up, Ilara stayed behind with Miller and Martha, taking notes on the details of the resistance. Miller looked at her with respect. You're vital, Ilara, not just because you're brave, but because you see the truth of the system. You are the clear voice we need. He handed her a small hand-drawn map. We need to get the word out to the neighboring townships, the ones that haven't yet formed a chapter. You'll be less suspicious than a traveling man. Can you ride to Willow Creek tomorrow? This was the final step of crossing the boundary line, an official role in the resistance. She was no longer just attending, she was an agent. I can, Ilara said, taking the map. Go to the general store there. The owner, Mr. Thompson, is hesitant. Tell him the story of the Kowalski mule. Tell him what I told you, that the land bank wants their farms for a consortium. I'll do it. Miller nodded. And one last thing, Ilara. Thorne knows you spoke up. He will be looking for any reason to put pressure on you and your father. Be careful. You are the light now, and the dark always tries to extinguish the light. Ilara left the schoolhouse with a terrifying sense of purpose. The fear was still there, a cold weight in her stomach, but it was now tempered by conviction. She was no longer just the daughter of a struggling farmer. She was a member of the Old Guard's resistance. She mounted Bess and rode back toward Havenwood, the dust rising beneath the horse's hooves. She had left the safety of her quiet individual life behind, crossing the boundary line into a new world of collective conflict. Her first major test was passed, but the true battle for the McDonald farm and the soul of Havenwood was yet to come.
The Vance farmhouse was a disaster, a visceral monument to Silas Thorne's fury. But as Ilara knelt beside her father, helping him up amidst the splintered wood and spilled kerosene, the chaos did something unexpected. It cleared her mind. Fear was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had taken her sense of security, her pride, and her cow, but they had given her an undeniable purpose. "We clean up," Thomas Vance repeated, his voice surprisingly firm, the pain of the wound on his temple seeming to focus his will. He was done with fear. "And then you go. You warn Daniel Hayes. Tell him about Henderson. Tell him Thorne is no longer playing by the bank's rules. He's playing by the law of the wild." It was a crucial instruction. Ilara's immediate priority shifted from mourning their loss to securing the resistance. She wrapped her father's head and left Toby to help him salvage what could be saved. By the time she mounted Bess and rode north, the moon was rising, casting long, fractured shadows across the dusty landscape. Shadows that now seemed to harbor not just wind, but human malice. She found Daniel Hayes hiding in the deserted north barn, the location Alara had chosen for its isolation. He was waiting, his face etched with worry, nursing a small, smoky fire in a rusted barrel. "Alara, you're late. What happened?" Thomas rose instantly, reading the story in her exhausted, grime-streaked face. She recounted the events: the vandalism, the brutal assault on her father, the theft of the cow, and the destruction of the mortgage receipt, their proof of payment. But the most important part was the identity of the perpetrators. Thorne has a man, a private investigator named Clint Barlow, and he was with Elias Henderson. Henderson, the man who argued against the union at the schoolhouse. Henderson is Thorne's shadow, his informant. He betrayed us all. Ilara's face hardened with professional concern. He was the seasoned organizer, and he instantly grasped the damage. "A spy is worse than an open enemy," Daniel stated, crushing a piece of coal under his boot. "Henderson knows the names of everyone at that meeting, Alara. He knows our plan for the McDonald's eviction. Our advantage is gone. Thorne will be ready for the penny auction." This was the full revelation of the hidden antagonist and the ensuing strategic crisis. The resistance was compromised before it could even begin. Alara slumped onto a bale of hay. "We can't call it off, Daniel, not after what Thorne did to my family. And the McDonald's are defenseless. They'll be on the road before the week is out." "We won't call it off. We'll change the game," Daniel countered, his mind already working. "This is what organized resistance is about, Alara, adapting to betrayal. We have to assume Thorne and Barlow know everything, the date, the time, and the place of the auction." Daniel walked to the wall and began sketching furiously with a piece of chalk, a crude map of the McDonald property and the surrounding roads. This was the strategic collaboration that solidified their alliance. The original plan was for the auction to draw a crowd and shame the land bank into backing down. Thorne will expect a simple, emotional mob. He'll show up with Coster, Barlow, and maybe a few state men ready to break heads and seize the land legally. "So we give them a show," Alara suggested, catching his intent. "We use the crowd as a distraction, not the main event." Daniel smiled, a flash of white in the gloom. "Exactly. We pivot. The allies you brought in from Willow Creek, Mr. Thompson and his men, we use them. They won't attend the auction. They'll go to the county courthouse." He circled a small, cramped area on his map. Thorne thinks the fight is here, on the land. He needs to realize the fight is political and legal. "Alara, you said the core truth is that Thorne is clearing land for a consortium. We need to expose the land bank's illegal arrangement with that Chicago firm." "But how?" Alara asked. "Those papers are hidden deep in the bank vaults or in Chicago." "No, not all of them," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The local land bank records must show the sales contracts, the valuation reports, and the specific correspondence. Those records are vulnerable." He looked at Alara, his eyes glittering with a reckless determination that matched her own newfound resolve. "Agnes can't just walk out with confidential documents, Daniel. She won't, but she controls access. We need to coordinate to McDonald auction with a strike on the bank's records. While Thorne and Barlow are out on the farm dealing with the mob and Henderson is confirming their presence, you and I, Alara, we go to the bank." Alara felt the danger of the plan. Breaking into the bank's records office, even an old dusty one, was a criminal act that would immediately brand them as radicals and fugitives. This was far beyond protecting a mule. This was direct confrontation with the heavy hand. "That's a felony, Daniel," she whispered, the weight of the word hanging in the air. "It is," he agreed, "but illegal evictions are a felony against the people. We are simply retrieving the evidence of their crime. We need to make the cost of knowing worth the price you just paid for it." He outlined the plan. The double-cross strategy. The test of trust. 1. The distraction. Henderson's confirmation.
Frank Miller and the farmers will proceed with the penny auction at the McDonald farm exactly as planned, confirming Henderson's tip to Thorne. 2. The infiltration, the hidden ally. Elara and Daniel will use the commotion to enter the county clerk's office, aided by Agnes, the records keeper, to find the specific documents proving the Chicago Consortium's role. 3. The new target. The evidence will be rushed to Willow Creek's farmers and Daniel's contacts for immediate political action, forcing the land bank to recall Thorne. The plan was risky, relying entirely on the loyalty of Agnes and the execution under immense pressure. Elara looked at Daniel, her primary ally. She had known him for barely 24 hours, but in the crucible of this growing conflict, he was the only person who offered a way forward that was smarter than just waiting for the next blow. "I need to know one thing, Daniel," Elara said, her eyes intense. "Why are you really doing this? You're not a farmer. You have no land to lose." Daniel looked down at his city hands, then back at her. "I have seen the system break people like your father before, Elara. Not just farmers, but coal miners, factory workers, the forgotten people. The Depression didn't create the greed, it simply removed the mask. And every person who accepts a bribe or gives in to fear, like Henderson, strengthens that mask. I fight because the dignity of the American worker, farmer, miner, or laundress, is worth fighting for. That's my cost of knowing the system." His answer was genuine, and it solidified Elara's trust. They were bound by a shared indignation that transcended personal property. They spent the next few hours meticulously detailing the steps. Daniel taught her how to recognize the legal documents they needed, explaining the jargon of foreclosure deeds and assignees. As the first faint light of dawn approached, Elara knew she had crossed the final boundary. Her farm was compromised, her family's safety was gone, and she was planning a break-in. She had fully entered the world of conflict. "I'll ride back now. I need to get the word to Frank Miller about the pivot," rising. "Good. Tell Miller to emphasize the spectacle of the auction. The louder and more emotional, the better. We need Thorne to feel confident that he's in control of the crowd." Elara mounted Bess. She paused, looking at the hidden barn, her lifeline, and then towards the east where the bank lay waiting. "Henderson will be at the auction, Daniel," she said, her voice hard. "We need to be faster than his betrayal." "We will," Daniel promised. "Go, and Elara, welcome to the war." As she rode away, Elara felt the weight of her new role. She was an intermediary, a messenger, an agent of espionage. The allies were ready. The shadow was exposed. The time of whispering was over. The time of bold action was at hand. The fight for the unyielding soil would be fought not with a plowshare, but with a pen and a truth retrieved from the heart of the enemy's bureaucracy.
The day was Tuesday, the day of the McDonald eviction and the planned double cross. Elara and Daniel Hayes had spent the previous day making meticulous preparations. Frank Miller and his farmers were ready to stage a loud, emotional spectacle at the McDonald farm to draw the attention of Silas Thorne, Deputy Coster, and the suspected informant, Elias Henderson. Meanwhile, Elara and Daniel were poised to strike at the bureaucratic heart of the oppression, the Havenwood County Clerk's office. Elara's personal state mirrored the dust-choked landscape, dry, brittle, but charged with a dangerous, imminent energy. Her father, Thomas, despite his injury, had insisted she go. "We lost the cow, Elara," he'd said, his voice hard. "Don't let us lose the reason we lost it." By 9 a.m., the dust-stained trucks and wagons of the Farmers Holiday Association were converging noisily near the McDonald property. Elara watched from a distance as Thorne's black sedan and Deputy Coster's official car pulled up, followed by a plain, powerful-looking coupe, Clint Barlow's vehicle. Henderson was already there, hovering near Thorne, subtly pointing out the leaders. The distraction was working. At 9:30 a.m., with the drama unfolding miles away, Elara and Daniel slipped into the back alley behind the county courthouse. Their essential ally, Agnes, the small, severe-looking records keeper, met them at the rear fire exit. Agnes had worked for the county for 30 years, her quiet life a perfect shield for her deep, burning resentment of the land bank. "The vault is open," Agnes whispered, her face pale.
I put the main deed register on the cart, waiting. But hurry, sheriff's not due back until lunch, but the risk is immense. They followed Agnes into the cavernous, cool space of the records vault. It smelled of aged paper, leather, and dust, the oppressive scent of documented history. Agnes quickly pointed to a ledger marked foreclosures and assigned deeds, 1930 to 1935, and slipped away. "We need the assignment papers," Daniel said, his voice low and urgent. "The documents that prove Thorne is transferring the seized deeds not to the land bank's main office, but directly to the Chicago Investment Consortium, Pinnacle Assets. That's the illegal action." Elara began working beside him, her farm-roughened fingers surprisingly deft among the brittle pages. Daniel hunted for the bulk transfers. Elara focused on the specific, local victims. She knew the names: Kowalski, McDonald, Henderson. As she flipped through the H's, a page caught her eye. It wasn't a foreclosure, it was a recent deed assignment from a few months prior, marked Private Sale, Expedited. The name on the deed was clear: Vance, Thomas and Son. Elara's breath caught, a cold, sharp intake of air that burned her lungs. She stared at the paper. It was a contract of sale for the Vance farm, not by foreclosure, but by private, voluntary agreement. The date was over 4 months old. The crucial truth was laid bare before her. Daniel, intent on the ledgers, didn't notice her stillness. "Anything, Elara?" She couldn't speak. She felt a sickening wave of heat and cold wash over her. She gripped the edge of the ledger, her knuckles white. She read the document again, tracing the faint, hurried signatures. Her father's signature, Thomas Vance, was shaky but undeniably his. Below it was a second signature, Elias Henderson. The document detailed the sale of 80 acres of the Vance property, the most fertile back acres near the creek bottom, to Elias Henderson for a distressingly low price, far below market value. The transaction was marked as a personal arrangement to cover back taxes and outstanding loan interest. Elara understood immediately. This wasn't a conspiracy by Thorne. This was a desperate betrayal by her own father, long before the cow was seized or the union was formed. Thomas had not been a victim of the bank's arithmetic alone. He had been a victim of a corrupt private deal with our neighbor, Henderson. He had sold a vital portion of the farm, the future, to stave off the initial threat of foreclosure, keeping the shame and the transaction secret from Elara and Toby. And Henderson, our neighbor, and a known union skeptic, had been sitting on that deed, waiting. He wasn't just a traitor to the union, he was a silent, insidious owner of a significant piece of the Vance legacy. This was the true, gut-wrenching cost of knowing, the betrayal of my father's pride. Elara had spent months fighting for my father's honor, for the family tradition of unyielding, individual self-reliance, only to discover that the very foundation of my fight, my father's moral high ground, had already been compromised by a secret, shameful bargain with our neighbor. My father's stoicism hadn't been pride, it had been guilt. The pain was physical, a searing emptiness where trust had been. All my passionate speeches, my dangerous missions, my risking my life and my family's safety, it was all based on a false narrative of pure, heroic resistance. My father had sold the very soil I was fighting for. "Elara!" Daniel's voice was sharp. "We've got it. Look! This bulk assignment ledger shows all McDonald's land, plus Kowalski's being transferred to Pinnacle Assets via Thorne. We have the proof." Daniel pulled out his camera, a small, sophisticated device, and began rapidly photographing the pages. Elara forced herself to shove the devastating Vance deed assignment back into the ledger and turned her focus on the mission. The crucial truth, however personally painful, was necessary. It clarified the true nature of their enemy and my father's dilemma. Henderson wasn't just a spy, he was a shark circling a damaged property. Thorne hadn't just used him, he had rewarded him with cheap, fertile land. Their individual struggle against the bank was part of a wider, self-destructive web of desperation and neighbor against neighbor betrayal. "Wait," Elara said, regaining her composure and pointing at the McDonald records. "Look at this subclause on the McDonald deed. It mentions a mineral rights waiver assigned separately to a local party 3 years ago." Daniel looked. "That's a clever tactic." Thorn sells the surface rights to the consortium, but the mineral rights, which are often more valuable, he sells to a local ally for cash. "Who is the local party?" Alara asked, her voice dangerously calm. They tracked the subclause to a separate ledger. The name listed on the mineral rights deed for the McDonald property was Silas Thorn. The realization was a punch to the gut. Thorn wasn't just a hired agent for the Chicago Consortium, he was simultaneously using his power to enrich himself personally by claiming the hidden wealth beneath the distressed farms. He was double-dipping, a local vampire feeding on both the farmers and the corporation he served. This was the necessary truth. Thorn was corrupt, personally motivated, and vulnerable to exposure of his local crimes, not just his corporate ones. "We have to get both," Alara insisted, her eyes now gleaming with cold resolve. "The Pinnacle Assets Proof and the Thorn Mineral Rights Assignment. The first is for the Union, the second is for the press. We have to show his personal greed." Daniel worked fast, photographing both sets of documents. As he finished, the distant sound of a car engine, too fast, too aggressive for the usual county traffic, screamed down the street outside. "Someone's coming back early," Agnes's voice echoed from the hallway. Daniel quickly packed the camera. "We're out, now." They slipped out the fire exit and ran back into the alley. They were barely a block away when the car, Thorn's black sedan, screeched to a halt outside the courthouse. "He knew it," Daniel gasped as they ducked behind a stack of empty crates. "Henderson must have had a panic button. He gave the tip as soon as the auction started." "It doesn't matter," Alara said, clutching the satchel containing the camera and the photographic evidence. The cost had been paid, the knowledge secured. Her fight was now fueled by a brutal twofold truth: my father's tragic failure and Thorn's blatant, personal corruption. They sprinted to the hidden barn. When they got there, Daniel immediately began developing the film. Alara waited, every muscle taut, the full weight of my father's betrayal pressing down on her. The shame of his action, the burden of his secret, was now hers to carry. When the photos were developed and laid out, the damning proof of the Chicago Consortium and the proof of Thorn's personal greed, Alara looked at the evidence. "Henderson's betrayal bought him 80 acres of our farm," Alara said, finally speaking the truth aloud. "But he bought it with a bad bargain. We will fight for that land too, but first, we fight Thorn." The immense cost of knowing was the loss of her innocence and her family's pristine moral standing. But in exchange, she had gained the necessary truth, the evidence that could bring down the entire local apparatus of oppression and save the rest of Havenwood. Alara Vance had lost her cow, her security, and her blind faith in her family's pride. But she had secured the weapon of truth. The battle was no longer just about survival, it was about vengeance and justice.
The dim light of the hidden barn was harsh and revealing. The photographic evidence, proof of Thorn's collusion with Pinnacle Assets and his personal mineral rights fraud, was developed and spread across a bale of hay. It was a victory, but a victory born of bitter knowledge and deep distrust. Alara and Daniel Hayes had achieved their mission, but the internal security of their small resistance was shattered. They now knew Elias Henderson was a spy, and Alara carried the secret shame of her father's desperate sale of the Vance land to that very traitor. Before they could use the evidence to save the McDonalds, they had to address the rot within their own ranks. "We need to tell Miller about Henderson immediately," Daniel urged, pointing at the photos. "He needs to change the script for the McDonald eviction. Use Henderson's presence as a red flag, not a casual detail." "No," Alara said, her voice strained. "We can't just tell Miller. Henderson has a family. If we accuse him publicly now, Thorn will retaliate against his wife and kids, and Henderson might not be the only one." She walked to the barn door, looking out at the faint promise of dawn. "Henderson was only paid for the land, Daniel. He wasn't paid to organize. He was motivated by fear and desperation, just like my father. We need to test the loyalty of the others before we trust them with this evidence. If we move too fast, the whole group could fragment." Daniel understood. The critical challenge was to filter out the uncertain members, the ones still clinging to a private, transactional logic of survival.
before entrusting the core of their defense to the group. "How do we test them?" Daniel asked. "We can't expose the evidence yet. It's our only leverage." Alara remembered the rage and pain in her father's eyes. Henderson's family is still in Havenwood. They don't know he's coming back from the auction with a bank guard. We use them. We force a choice on the community: loyalty to a man or loyalty to the cause. The test. Confronting the traitor's kin. Alara rode back to Havenwood alone, leaving Daniel to safeguard the evidence. She rode not to her own vandalized farm, but to the small, unkempt homestead of the Hendersons. Elias Henderson's wife, Mary, was hanging a ragged line of laundry, a defiant act of normalcy against the endless dust. Mary was a weary woman, older than Elias, her face etched with the worry of motherhood in the depression. Alara dismounted and walked straight up to her, dispensing with greetings. "Mary, where is Elias?" Mary flinched at the abruptness. He went out early, Alara. Said he had a job, a paying job for once, a special contract with the bank." She looked away, shame already in her posture. "He went to the McDonald farm, Mary. He is there with Silas Thorne and a bank detective named Clint Barlow. They are there to stop the resistance. Your husband is helping the bank evict the McDonalds." "No," Elias wouldn't. "He said it was just surveillance, that he was just getting information for the workers." "He lied, Mary, and this is not surveillance. This is the cost of knowing the truth. Do you know why Elias got that special contract and that cash? Because 4 months ago, he bought 80 acres of my father's land from under him for pennies on the dollar, saving your family's farm by bankrupting ours." He watched the color drain from Mary's face as the secret, which only Thomas, Henderson, and now Alara knew, was laid bare. He said it was only a loan," Mary whispered, tears starting in her eyes. "No," Alara stated unequivocally. "He bought it. He sacrificed the Vance legacy for your family's security, and now he's sacrificing the McDonald's to protect that ill-gotten deed from exposure. Your family is secure because he betrayed his neighbors." Alara didn't offer sympathy. She offered clarity. "You have a choice, Mary. Your husband will be coming back today, riding with Barlow, the man who smashed my family's home and stole our cow. You can meet him with silence and accept the shame of his betrayal, or you can meet him as a defender of this community." "What can I do?" Mary cried, clutching the laundry. "The meeting tonight is at the schoolhouse. Frank Miller needs to know who else Elias was talking to. He needs to know what Elias planned to do after the auction, and he needs to know how many more people like Elias are among us. Your loyalty, Mary, is the first test. Choose where your allegiance lies, with the man who betrayed us, or with the people he tried to destroy." Mary Henderson was torn between marital loyalty and moral truth. Alara had forced the crisis, weaponizing the knowledge of the past to secure the integrity of the future. The Assembly of the Allies. Alara returned to the hidden barn and immediately sent word to Frank Miller, asking him to call an urgent, unscheduled meeting of the Havenwood chapter after the McDonald auction, but before the farmers disbanded. Miller understood the urgency. The shadow had to be confronted. That evening, the farmers who had participated in the loud, confusing penny auction at the McDonald farm gathered again at the schoolhouse. Thorne, Coster, and Barlow had been successfully distracted. The auction itself was a chaotic failure, but the infiltration of the courthouse had been a success.
The mood was strained. They had failed to save the McDonald's land legally, but they had at least prevented the family from being thrown out immediately, creating a tense standoff. When Frank Miller rose to speak, Alara stood by his side, the satchel with the photographic evidence at her feet. "Friends, we failed today," Miller said, his voice somber. "We failed because we came into this fight believing in the honesty of our struggle, while our enemy was operating in the dark." He then revealed the first piece of necessary truth looking directly at the anxious faces in the room. Today, at the auction, Elias Henderson was seen openly advising Mr. Thorne and his private detective, Clint Barlow. Henderson was the man who sold our secrets. Henderson is a spy. A wave of shocked, angry murmurs swept through the room. The men who had worked beside Henderson, who had trusted him with their fears, felt the stab of personal betrayal. We have reason to believe that Henderson was not alone, Miller continued, turning to Ilara. Ilara Vance, the one who first exposed Thorne's illegal tactics, has secured evidence of a much wider conspiracy. But before she shares that evidence, before we entrust our entire future to this new plan, we must know this association is whole. We must pass a test of loyalty, the final test of trust. Ilara stepped forward. She didn't speak about the Chicago Consortium or the mineral rights. She spoke about the nature of their fight. The bank and the forces of greed operate through two weapons, fear and transaction, Ilara announced, her gaze sweeping the room. Henderson's loyalty was transactional. He exchanged our secrets for his own short-term security. The bank is offering the same terms to every one of you. Betray your neighbor, keep your land for one more month. She looked at each man, remembering their past arguments, their fears, and their quiet acts of kindness. This evidence in my bag, she continued, holding up the satchel, proves that Silas Thorne is a corrupt criminal who is cheating his own bank. It can bring him down, stop the land bank evictions, and buy us the time to organize legally. But using it is an act of war. It will make every one of us who handles it a declared enemy of the land bank. If you have a secret deal with Thorne, if you are trading information for time, if you still believe that your individual silence will save your family, you must leave this room now. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the weight of unspoken compromises. This was the true test of loyalty. It forced every man to question their personal survival strategy against the collective need. It was the moment where every private sin of desperation had to be confessed or rejected. Seconds stretched into minutes. The kerosene lamp sputtered. A farmer named Jed Hawkins, a man who hadn't spoken at the meetings, slowly rose from his chair. His face was red with humiliation and fear. I took 5 bags of flour from Thorne 2 months ago, Jed stammered, his head bowed. Credit, he made me sign a paper saying I'd report any agitators I heard talking. He was followed by another, a young man named Clem, who confessed to reporting rumors about the schoolhouse meetings to Deputy Coaster, hoping to get a break on his taxes. 2 more men rose, each confessing small, desperate acts of compliance or betrayal, a reflection of the crushing poverty and fear that had permeated the community. They were the shattered loyalties, men who had not chosen to be shadows, but had been forced into the darkness by circumstance. Miller nodded, his expression compassionate but resolute. Go home, brothers. We understand your fear, but your fight is not here. Your fight is with Thorne to pay back what you owe him. Our fight is different now. The 5 men left, their shame a palpable weight in the room. The remaining 10 men, including Frank Miller, Mr. Kowalski, and Martha, looked at each other with renewed, fiercely committed eyes. The association had purged its internal shadows. The alliance was fragile, but it was now true. Ilara looked at the door. No one else rose. The test was over. Now, Ilara said, opening the satchel and pulling out the developed photographs. The images of the corporate documents and Thorne's personal greed were startlingly clear under the lamplight. We have the truth. We know that Silas Thorne is working for a criminal investment firm and enriching himself with our mineral rights.
We are not just fighting the weather, we are fighting a racketeer. And now, we fight fire with fire. We use this evidence to bring the power of the press and the federal government down on him. We send this to Daniel Hayes's contacts tonight, and we watch Thorne fall." The men and Martha gathered around the evidence, their faces alight with a mixture of terror and fierce vindication. The test of loyalty had cost them 5 members, but the 10 remaining had forged a bond of unbreakable commitment, ready to step into the dangerous world of political action. The quiet farm girl, Elara Vance, had become the leader who secured their alliance, paying the price of painful truth for the necessary cohesion.
The days immediately following the test of loyalty meeting were a blur of frenetic, dangerous action. Elara, Frank Miller, and Daniel Hayes worked tirelessly, sending the photographic evidence of Thorne's conspiracy, the Pinnacle Assets collusion, and his personal mineral rights fraud through Daniel's secret contacts. The goal was to reach a powerful newspaper editor in Kansas City and a key congressional aide in Washington, D.C., simultaneously. This was the first phase of the false victory. Elara was now fully immersed in the role of the Resistance's intelligence officer. She was the one who rode the dusty backroads, carefully avoiding Thorne's known patrols, delivering encrypted messages and fragments of news. She was no longer just fighting for the Vance farm. She was orchestrating the takedown of an entire corrupt system. The tension in Havenwood was unbearable. Thorne knew he'd been betrayed. The auction had been a spectacle, and Elias Henderson had vanished, likely fleeing the county with his ill-gotten cash. But he didn't know how deep the penetration went. He was paranoid, and his fear manifested as relentless pressure on the remaining farmers. Deputy Coster's car was seen everywhere, shadowing the houses of the men who had attended the schoolhouse meeting. The false victory, the reckoning. The breakthrough came late on a Friday afternoon. Elara was with Daniel in the hidden barn when the coded telegram arrived, smuggled in by Martha, the diner owner. The message, brief and triumphant, read, "D.C. acting. Headline Saturday. The coalition is broken." The news swept through the core group like fire. The congressional aide, motivated by the clear evidence of fraud and conflict of interest, had launched an immediate internal investigation into the federal land bank's assignment policies. More dramatically, the Kansas City paper was running a front-page exposé. Corruption in the Dust Bowl. Local bank manager defrauds farmers and bank alike. The climax of the first half of the story had arrived. They had won. On Saturday morning, Havenwood was transformed. The paper arrived by train, the headline a blazing scandal. Farmers gathered on the main street, their faces alight with vindication, holding the proof of Thorne's treachery aloft. At 10 a.m., the official news broke. Silas Thorne was arrested. He was taken into custody by 2 federal marshals, not Deputy Coster, who stood by, pale and useless. Thorne was charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The land bank was forced to issue a temporary moratorium on all foreclosures in the county, pending a full investigation into the Pinnacle Assets Consortium. It was a definitive victory. The heavy hand had been neutralized. The shadow, Thorne, had been removed, and the immediate threat to the Vance, Kowalski, and McDonald farms was lifted. The Havenwood resistance had achieved the impossible. Elara stood with her father on the main street, watching Thorne's humiliating departure. Thomas Vance, standing tall for the first time in months, placed his hand on Elara's shoulder. "You did it, Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved the farm. You saved Havenwood. You were smarter than the numbers." The farmers cheered Elara's name. For a moment, she felt the pure, unadulterated triumph of the cause. The fear was gone, replaced by a radiant collective hope. The real loss, the price of neglect.
Ilara returned to the Vance farm that afternoon, the glow of victory still warming her. The mortgage was safe, the pressure was off, and her family's future was secured, at least for now. But as she rode into the yard, the quiet was unsettling. Too quiet. Toby met her at the porch, his eyes wide and red, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "Ilara," he choked out. "It's Papa. He collapsed." The triumphant energy drained instantly from Ilara. She dismounted, her boots suddenly heavy and slow. She found Thomas Vance lying on the cot in the kitchen, shivering uncontrollably under a pile of blankets. His breathing was shallow and rattling. "He's been working since you left," Toby whispered, his voice cracking with self-reproach. "He was trying to repair the fence the vandals tore down, and he was using the old hand plow to try and cover the topsoil near the house before the next wind. He kept coughing, but he wouldn't stop. He said he had to fix the place for you, now that the mortgage was safe." Ilara rushed to her father, taking his hand. His skin was burning hot and dry. "Papa, what is it? We have the money now. We can get a doctor in town." "No doctor, Ilara," Thomas wheezed, shaking his head faintly. "It's the dust. Been building up. The fever started yesterday, but I couldn't tell you. You needed to focus on Thorn." He was suffering from a severe case of dust pneumonia, or brown lung disease, the terrible, common affliction of the Dust Bowl era, caused by the inhalation of fine silt over months and years. His lungs, already weakened by age and the relentless work, were now consumed by infection. The real loss slammed into Ilara with the force of a black blizzard. In her weeks of intense focus on the external political battle, the bank, the deeds, the meetings, she had neglected the relentless, invisible oppressor, the dust itself. She had been so consumed with saving the land from Thorn that she had failed to see the dust was slowly killing the man who held the land most dear. The victory, the false victory over Thorn, was immediately rendered hollow by this personal catastrophe. What good was the land if the man who cherished it most was dying? The town doctor, a weary man named Dr. Miller, arrived late that evening. He examined Thomas and confirmed Ilara's fears. "It's grave, Ilara. His lungs are filling up. We need clean air, fluids, and rest, but mostly, we need a miracle. The dust has been too persistent." He paused, his expression full of shared tragedy. "You fought the bank for this soil, Ilara, but this same soil is taking your father." The painful misunderstanding was the core tragedy of the midpoint. Ilara believed the external battle, Thorn, the bank, was the only war she had to fight. She had prioritized the collective political mission over the immediate domestic threat, assuming her father, with his unyielding pride, would hold on. Her success in the political arena had led directly to the neglect that caused her personal disaster. "I need to get him out of here, Toby," Ilara said, her voice cracking. "We have to get him to clean air. Maybe the city, where the air isn't poisoned." "We can't," Toby whispered, pointing to the empty spot where the Jersey cow had been housed. "We don't have the money. We don't have the cow. Thorn took our last asset." The irony was crushing. Thorn was in jail. The evictions were halted, but the damage he inflicted, the theft of the cow used for milk and trade, had left them too poor and too crippled to afford the very medical care that the freedom from the mortgage should have provided. Ilara sat beside her father, clutching the fragile bank receipt, the proof of her false victory, and felt the devastating weight of her real loss. She had saved the farm, but she was losing her father. She had secured a strategic win for the community, but she had paid the ultimate personal price. The fight was not over. It had merely shifted. She now faced a desperate race against time, needing money not for a mortgage payment, but for a life-saving escape, and her primary enemy was no longer a greedy banker, but the relentless, indifferent disease of the dust itself.
The triumph of Silas Thorne's arrest was short-lived, replaced by a devastating personal emergency. The tide had turned bitterly. The enemy was no longer a corrupt banker, but the relentless dust that was consuming Thomas Vance's lungs. Alara was paralyzed, her political victory rendered pointless by a natural disaster she had neglected. Thomas lay feverish on his cot, his breathing a shallow, painful rasp. Dr. Miller's prognosis was bleak. Without clean air and intensive care that required money they didn't possess, Thomas would not survive the week. "I have to get him out," Alara whispered to Toby, who was keeping a vigil by their father's side. "To the city, to a clinic." "But the money, Alara," Toby replied, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "We don't have enough for a single train ticket, let alone the doctor's bills." The irony was a crushing weight. They had defeated the economic system, but were now immobilized by the poverty the system had inflicted. Thorne's retaliatory theft of the Jersey cow, their only source of tradable milk and a potential asset, now acted as a fatal, delayed blow from a jailed enemy. The antagonist's forces consolidate power. The external world, which had seemed to offer a reprieve, quickly began to close in again. The moratorium on foreclosures that the land bank issued was a weak shield, and the forces aligned against the farmers quickly consolidated their power. The first sign came when Alara rode into Havenwood hoping to trade the last of their salvaged personal items, a heavy silver-plated watch, for cash. She found the main street silent, the celebratory atmosphere of the previous day completely gone. The farmers who had cheered her were now cautious, their eyes shifting away from her. She went to Mr. Goldfarb's pawn shop. The door was padlocked. A notice from the county clerk's office was nailed to the door. Business closed for audit. They got Goldfarb, Martha, the diner owner, rushing Alara into the relative safety of her restaurant kitchen. Thorne's friends didn't waste any time. The federal marshals took Thorne, but they left the rest of the snakes. The land bank sent in a new agent, a slick city fellow named Mr. Reynolds, and he started the cleanup. Martha explained that Reynolds hadn't lifted the moratorium, but he had immediately targeted Alara's allies. Goldfarb was shut down, likely for aiding the resistance. Frank Miller was suddenly called to a mandatory tax audit that would financially cripple him. And the county clerk, Agnes, the silent ally who had provided the access to the deeds, was fired and publicly branded as a communist sympathizer. The antagonist's forces, the bureaucracy and the financial machine, had not stopped. They had simply consolidated power under a more efficient, less corruptible agent, Reynolds, and systematically eliminated Alara's support network. "They are cutting the head off the snake, Alara," Martha said, pouring her a cup of bitter, lukewarm coffee. "They know you are the head. They are waiting for you to surface, desperate for money or help." Alara looked at the cup. She needed money now more than ever, not for a political fight, but for a life. The tide turned bitter meant that the very community she had saved was now too frightened and too targeted to help her. The darkest hour, betrayal and desperation. Later that day, Daniel Hayes met Alara secretly at the abandoned schoolhouse. He had heard the news Agnes was in trouble, Frank Miller was facing financial ruin, and Goldfarb was gone. "The window is closing, Alara," Daniel said urgently. "Reynolds is systematic. He'll find me soon. The land bank will reverse the moratorium and the McDonald eviction will proceed. We need to expose Thorne's mineral rights fraud immediately before the scandal dies down." Alara placed her hands over her face, the weight of her dual crisis crushing her. "I can't, Daniel. My father is dying of the dust. I need to get him out today. The scandal can wait. My father can't." Daniel hesitated, then looked at her with profound sympathy. "I understand, Alara, but we can't sacrifice the entire movement for one life, no matter how precious. You found the evidence of Thorne's mineral rights fraud. That document is worth a fortune to the right person, or to the wrong one. You must use it to bring down Reynolds, not for a train ticket." The conflict was agonizing, the moral demand of the collective versus the desperate need of the individual.
I have to use the only thing I have left, Alara insisted, her voice raw. I have to sell the truth, Daniel. I have to find the one person who would pay cash to keep Thorne's private scandal quiet. There was only one person powerful enough and corrupt enough to pay for silence. Thorne's own lawyer, Mr. Percival. Alara rode to the city that night, reaching Percival's expensive, dimly lit office building in the early hours of the morning. Percival was a man of cold, calculated professionalism, uninterested in the plight of farmers. "Miss Vance," he greeted her, adjusting his silk tie. "A surprise. Silas is no longer in a position to assist you." Alara placed the photograph of the mineral rights deed, the one showing Thorne's personal fraud, on his mahogany desk. "Thorne is in jail, Mr. Percival," Alara stated, her gaze unwavering. "But he hasn't been charged with this yet. This shows he used his bank position to personally seize valuable mineral rights on the McDonald property, a clear conflict of interest and a felony separate from the Pinnacle Assets conspiracy. This single document could ruin his reputation, jeopardize his freedom, and lead to massive civil suits that will strip his family of everything." Percival picked up the photograph, his eyes cold. He knew the devastating power of the evidence. "What is your price, Miss Vance?" $300, Alara stated, the amount precisely what Dr. Miller had estimated for transportation and initial city treatment. $300 in cash. You buy this picture, you get the negative, and the promise that I will never speak of it again. Percival smiled slowly, a chilling expression of triumph. $300 is a cheap price for professional discretion. You are a clever girl, Alara. You know how to play the game. He opened his safe and counted the money onto the desk, a stack of crisp, clean banknotes. Alara felt a dizzying relief. The darkest hour was momentarily lifted by the filthy, necessary compromise. She grabbed the money and, as promised, handed him the negative of the photograph. She had betrayed the resistance, using the collective's hard-won weapon for her desperate private need. But as she turned to leave, Percival's voice stopped her. "One more thing, Miss Vance," he purred. "While you were here making this arrangement, my people picked up your associate, Daniel Hayes. He was found at a derelict barn outside of town with a strange little camera and a map. He's been detained by the new land bank agent, Reynolds, and we'll be asking him about the missing evidence regarding Pinnacle Assets." The money in Alara's hand suddenly felt like poison. Her personal salvation, the $300 that could save her father, had been purchased directly at the cost of her primary ally's freedom. Percival smiled, his triumph complete. "Now, Miss Vance, you have your $300, and we have your friend. The tide always turns, doesn't it?" Alara stumbled out of the office, the money clutched in her hand, her victory over Thorne utterly meaningless. She had secured her father's life, but she had lost the man who represented the future of the resistance. She had sold the evidence that could have saved the community, and in doing so, she had delivered Daniel into the hands of the new antagonist, Reynolds. She was alone, tainted by necessary compromise, carrying a life-saving sum of money that felt like 30 pieces of silver. The darkest hour had arrived. Thomas was dying from the dust, and Daniel was now the one paying the ultimate price for her individual desperation. Alara Vance was a fugitive, a pariah, carrying the weight of both her father's imminent death and the resistance' imminent collapse.
Alara rode out of the city with $300, her father's life money, clutched so tightly in her hand that the crisp banknotes crumpled into a useless mass. The money was a searing weight, purchased at the cost of the movement's survival and Daniel Hayes' freedom. She was a fugitive, a pariah, and a savior all at once. The sun rose over the scorched plains, but to Alara, it felt like a burning star, a cruel, relentless beacon exposing her isolation and her compromise. This was her personal crisis, the unbearable conflict between the individual duty to her family and the collective duty to her community. The immediate duty, saving Thomas. Alara didn't hesitate with the money. She rode straight back to the farm, ignoring the danger of being recognized by Reynolds or Barlow. Toby, exhausted and despairing, was huddled by the cot. "We have to move, now," Alara commanded, her voice hollow but resolute. "I have the money. We are taking Papa to the clinic in the city." The journey was a blur of frantic action. They loaded Thomas into the old wagon, covering him with damp cloths to keep the dust away from his labored breathing. Alara used the money to pay a driver with a clean, enclosed vehicle, a luxury they hadn't dreamed of, to take them to the city hospital. At the hospital, the crisp notes were handed over, a transaction that felt sacrilegious. The doctors were grim, but agreed to admit Thomas and begin treatment for dust pneumonia. For the next 24 hours, Alara sat in the cold, sterile waiting room, her mind a torment. She had secured her father's life, fulfilling her deepest, most fundamental individual duty. But the silence around her was deafening, filled with the guilt of the real loss, Daniel Hayes. The personal crisis, the weight of compromise. As Thomas stabilized in the clean, oxygenated air, Alara faced the full scope of her personal crisis. She had been tasked with leading the fight against the heavy hand. Hemlock had told her to be smarter than the numbers. Goldfarb had offered her solidarity. She had embraced the collective, preached the righteousness of the Union, and then, at the first moment of true personal need, she had committed the ultimate betrayal. She had traded the evidence of the collective's weapon for her family's individual safety. "Daniel is in a jail cell because of my desperation," she thought, the realization burning hotter than the midday sun. "The Union will collapse because the evidence is gone. Thorne may be in custody, but Reynolds, the new antagonist, will use the vacuum to reverse the moratorium and seize all the land." She felt the crushing weight of her compromise. She had saved one man's life with blood money, but she had condemned dozens of families, including the Kowalskis and the McDonalds, to ruin. Her victory over Thorne was now nothing more than a temporary personal alibi. She had failed the test of the unyielding soil, not by working too hard, but by proving that, when pressed, her own roots were transactional, prioritizing her bloodkin over her chosen community. The crucial realization, the dual enemy. Alara left the hospital in the evening and walked the city streets, seeking solitude under the distant glow of the skyscrapers. The air was clean, the streets were paved, and the people were oblivious to the dust and despair of the plains. It was there, standing outside a newspaper office where the scandalous headlines about Thorne were already fading, that she had her crucial realization. The struggle was not either-or. It was not father versus union. The two crises were inextricably linked, the individual and the collective. Thorne did not create the dust. The dust created the desperation that Thorne exploited. The loss of the cow, the damage to the farm, and Thomas's illness were not separate from the fight against the bank. They were the bank's tools. Thorne and Reynolds knew that the most effective way to crush the resistance wasn't through politics, but through poverty and desperation, forcing people like Thomas to make self-destructive deals and forcing people like Alara to choose between a dying relative and a sacred cause. Alara realized that she couldn't choose just one. She had to fight both enemies simultaneously. She had to save Daniel and expose Reynolds using the very isolation and information she still possessed. Her father was safe in clean air. The collective's immediate need for the photographic evidence was gone, but the knowledge itself, the crucial truth about the land bank's illegal dealings, still resided in her mind. And her deepest asset was now her freedom. She was a fugitive, but she was also unseen, unbound by the rules of polite protest. The decision, the vow beneath the burning star. Alara found a small, cheap diner and sat in a booth, drawing a crude map on a napkin. The decision was clear. She had to leverage her current position, her isolation, and her full knowledge of Thorne's network to strike a blow that would save Daniel and, by extension, the resistance. The evidence of Thorne's fraud was gone, but the final devastating piece of the puzzle remained. The traitor,
Elias Henderson. Henderson had the cash from the bank and the deed to the Vance land. If Alara could prove his complicity and expose his ill-gotten deed publicly, it would achieve three things. It would delegitimize every action taken by Thorne using Henderson's information, weakening Reynolds' new authority. It would publicly avenge her father's betrayal and her personal loss. And it would create enough public pressure and chaos to force Reynolds to focus on internal security, potentially creating an opportunity for Daniel to escape or be freed.
Alara Vance returned to Havenwood in the deep shadows before dawn, driven by a cold, relentless purpose. Her father was safe, her ally Daniel Hayes was imprisoned, and her movement was fractured. Her only remaining weapon was the truth, the knowledge of Elias Henderson's betrayal and the land bank's intent, and her own uncompromised freedom. She had chosen the McDonald farm as the site of her final confrontation. It was the place of the failed penny auction, the symbol of the land bank's temporary victory, and the place where the new antagonist, Agent Reynolds, was expected to execute the eviction order as soon as the moratorium was lifted. The main conflict was no longer about saving a single farm. It was about proving that the spirit of the community was stronger than the corporate greed that had sought to divide and conquer them. The assembly and the trap. Alara first rode to the homes of the 10 loyal allies who had passed the test of loyalty: Frank Miller, who was preparing for his tax audit, Mr. Kowalski, and Martha. She spoke to each of them in hurried whispers, avoiding the main roads, and laid out her plan, a final, public action that risked everything. Reynolds will make his move early, Alara explained to Miller, handing him a handwritten document. He wants to restore the bank's authority. He'll use the McDonald eviction to send a clear message. The resistance is over. We need to use that message against him. The document Alara gave Miller was not the official bank deed, which was gone, but a carefully detailed affidavit, sworn and signed by her, a fugitive, outlining everything she knew: Thorne's mineral rights fraud, the Pinnacle Assets Consortium, and the secret, fraudulent sale of the Vance land to Elias Henderson, complete with the true, meager price paid. This will be the proof, Frank. It's my word, but it contains details only the bank, Thorne, and Henderson would know. It's enough to raise doubt. Frank Miller, though pale with the risk, met her gaze. You are asking us to stand against the county sheriff, Agent Reynolds, and potentially the state guard with nothing but a girl's signed word? I'm asking you to stand against a lie with the truth, Alara corrected. If we break their confidence, we break their power. By 5 a.m., the core group of 10 allies had gathered silently on the perimeter of the McDonald farm. They positioned themselves not as a mob, but as 10 solemn, unmoving figures positioned to block the single road leading to the farmhouse. The confrontation at dawn. The sky was just beginning to bruise with the approach of dawn when the black cars arrived. First was Deputy Coster's car, followed by a sleek, powerful black sedan, Agent Reynolds. Coster was out first, his face drawn and nervous. Reynolds, a cold, immaculate figure in a tailored suit, stepped out slowly, surveying the small, silent group with disdain. He immediately recognized Alara, standing slightly ahead of the group, her face resolute despite her exhaustion. Miss Vance? Reynolds' voice was sharp, professional, and contemptuous. There is no quiet obedience left, Mr. Reynolds. There is only the truth. The truth. Miss Vance, the truth is that your comrade Daniel Hayes is in custody. The truth is that your pathetic little union is finished. And the truth is that the McDonald's property is forfeit. Step aside or you will be arrested for obstruction and aiding a fugitive. Alara remained rooted. The climax had begun. You can seize the land, Mr. Reynolds, but you cannot seize the truth, Alara challenged.
You are here to restore the land bank's authority, but I can prove that the man you replaced, Silas Thorne, used his position to commit felony fraud by seizing personal mineral rights. Reynolds didn't flinch. Baseless slander. The deeds are sealed. The investigation is underway. Step aside. I have more than slander, Delara said, taking a step forward. I know who helped Thorne sell out this community. I know the man who betrayed us all, traded our secrets for cheap land, and then tried to beat my father to death. She pointed directly behind Reynolds toward a figure who had just emerged from the sleek, black sedan. Elias Henderson. Henderson had been hiding in the car, smuggled back to the scene by Reynolds to show the farmers that one of their own was now officially working for the bank, thus symbolizing the final corruption of the resistance. "There he is, Mr. Reynolds!" Alara shouted, loud enough for the wind to carry her voice. "Elias Henderson, the man you used to prove the land bank's authority. He is not a loyal worker. He is a criminal who betrayed his neighbor Thomas Vance by secretly purchasing 80 acres of the Vance farm for a pittance." The sound of Henderson's betrayal being shouted publicly ripped through the silent tension. Henderson paled, seeing his shame exposed. He stumbled backward. Alara didn't stop. She turned to her allies. "Frank, read the affidavit, now!" Frank Miller, seizing the moment, pulled out Alara's affidavit and, his voice shaking with righteous fury, began to read the document aloud, detailing the secret sale price, the date, and the intent of the conspiracy, all details that proved Alara's intimate, irrefutable knowledge of Thorne's corruption. The farmers listened in stunned silence. Reynolds realized the depth of his exposure. The legal process was his shield, and Alara was ripping it away with raw, undeniable fact. "Stop them, Barlow!" Reynolds hissed. Barlow, the private enforcer, charged toward Miller to seize the paper, but before he could reach him, Alara stepped into his path. This was the ultimate and most intense confrontation, not with a gun, but with physical, moral resistance. "You came to my home, Barlow! You struck my father! You stole our livelihood! You are the hand of the villain, and you will not touch my people again." Alara was slight, but her defiance was absolute. Barlow, surprised by the sheer courage of the young woman, hesitated for a crucial second. In that second, the tide truly turned. Mr. Kowalski, the man whose mule Alara had saved, and Martha, the stout diner owner, surged forward, flanking Alara and blocking Barlow's charge. The spirit of solidarity which Alara had fought to preserve was finally made manifest. The small, unified group stood fast. Reynolds saw the loss of control. His authority relied on the farmers being isolated and fearful. The public confrontation, the exposure of Henderson, and the physical defiance of the small group was catastrophic. The resolution. "This is an outrage," Reynolds screamed, turning to Coster. "Arrest them! Arrest her! She is a fugitive who aided a terrorist!" Deputy Coster, who had witnessed the community's quiet suffering and Alara's impossible courage, and who saw the obvious shame of Henderson, suddenly looked at his own position. He was being ordered to violently arrest 10 respected local citizens on the word of a man whose own office was now mired in scandal. Coster remained rigid. He refused the order. "I can't do that, Mr. Reynolds." Coster stated, his voice barely a whisper, but firm. "They ain't obstructing anything the law requires. They're just standing on the side of the road. And I won't take part in any more of Thorne's schemes." The refusal of the local law enforcement was the final, decisive moment resolving the main conflict. Reynolds was exposed, his professional strongman was physically blocked, and his only legal enforcement, Coster, had deserted him. The farmers had won. Reynolds, recognizing the complete failure of his authority, jumped back into his sedan, dragging the terrified Henderson with him. "You'll pay for this, Vance!" he shouted as the car sped away, leaving Coster standing alone in the dust. Alara stood breathing heavily, her body trembling, but victorious. The sun, fully risen now, cast a golden light over the small group of allies. The ultimate resolution was clear. The McDonald's eviction was temporarily averted. The land bank's local authority was broken, and the organized resistance had won its first true, definitive battle. Later that day, Frank Miller would use Ilara's affidavit and Coster's testimony to force a formal inquiry into the land bank's policies, leading to Daniel Hayes's release and the permanent protection of the remaining farms. But standing beneath the burning star of the dawn, Ilara knew the greatest victory was internal. She had repaid the debt to the community, saved her father, and proved that the unyielding soil was not just the land beneath their feet, but the strength of the people who chose to stand together.
The dust, disturbed by the fleeing sedan of Agent Reynolds, slowly settled over the McDonald farm. Deputy Coster stood rigid, his hand still hovering near his holster, a man stunned by his own sudden courage. The 10 allies of the Farmers' Holiday Association stood victorious but exhausted, their chests heaving with the aftermath of the intense confrontation. The thunder had passed. A profound, unnerving silence settled over the plain, a silence that felt heavier than the dust itself. Assessing the gains. The immediate gains were immense and tangible. 1. The McDonald's farm. The eviction had been publicly aborted. Without Coster's support, Reynolds had no legal mechanism to seize the property. The McDonalds were safe. 2. The alliance's vindication. Ilara's affidavit and the exposure of Henderson's corruption, combined with Coster's refusal to enforce the eviction, had publicly validated the farmers' claims. The community had seen the proof that their struggle was not against honest debt, but against criminal racketeering. 3. The capture of Daniel Hayes. The pressure of the crisis, culminating in Coster's defection, would make Daniel Hayes an unbearable liability for Reynolds. Coster immediately agreed to deliver a signed statement regarding the bank's coercion, which Frank Miller knew was the key to securing Daniel's release. Frank Miller clapped Ilara on the shoulder, his face alight with awe. "You did it, Ilara. You gave Coster the chance to choose right, and he took it. We won." Martha, the diner owner, looked at Ilara, her eyes wet. "You saved more than the land, child. You saved our pride." Assessing the losses. However, the silence also brought the weight of the losses back into sharp focus. The victory was stained by lingering scars and crucial sacrifices. Ilara's own assessment was cold and clear, even as her allies cheered her name. 1. Personal loss. Thomas Vance. Her father was stable but still gravely ill, confined to a city hospital. Her success was a joy he could only experience remotely, and the battle was only won because she had compromised her morals to secure his life. The dust, the true constant antagonist, still held Thomas captive. 2. Physical loss. The Vance farm. Her personal home was a wreck. The cow was gone. The mortgage receipt was ash. The trauma of the assault and the vandalism was a permanent physical scar left by Thorne's rage. 3. The loss of the traitor. Elias Henderson. Henderson, the symbol of transactional betrayal, had escaped with Reynolds, likely fleeing the county. He carried the ill-gotten deed to the Vance land, and while Ilara had exposed his crime, the land itself was still legally his until a court could intervene, a long, costly process. He was a symbol of the poison that would take years to purge. 4. The loss of Goldfarb and Agnes. Goldfarb's pawn shop remained shuttered, and Agnes was jobless. Their quiet sacrifices, the necessary internal allies, had not yet been redeemed. The conversation with Coster. Ilara walked over to Deputy Coster, who was sitting on the running board of his patrol car, his head bowed. "Deputy Coster," she said softly. Coster looked up, his eyes weary. "It's over, Ilara. Thorne's done. Reynolds will be recalled. I'll make sure the investigation gets all the documents it needs." "You did the right thing today, Dale," Ilara said, using his first name, a gesture of respect that crossed the old line between law and outlaw. "I didn't do it for you, Ilara. I did it for myself. I saw what Thorne was, what greed does.
And when I saw that professional hitman Barlow attack a girl and a helpless old man like Kowalski, I realized I'd spent too long enforcing a lie. I'll sign the statements. I'll make sure Daniel Hayes gets out. Ilara knew his statement, the official shift of the local establishment, was the true and lasting key to their victory. Thank you, Dale. The land bank will not forgive you for this. They will try to destroy your reputation. Coster looked out at the dust-covered fields. I know, but I won't enforce a fraudulent eviction. I draw my line right here on the McDonald property. The path forward. Later, back at the schoolhouse, the Core 10 allies met to define the next phase, the true work of rebuilding. The land bank is crippled but not dead, Frank Miller announced. Reynolds will be replaced by another agent, someone colder, smarter. We have to assume the moratorium is temporary. We have time now, but we must use it. Ilara, having achieved the political victory, stepped back into her role as the strategic heart of the movement. We need to save Goldfarb and Agnes first, she dictated, her voice steady. Frank, use Coster's testimony to force a public retraction of the charges against Agnes. We need to restore the faith of the smaller allies. Martha, you will be the treasurer. We need to pool resources to hire a cheap lawyer to file a countersuit on the basis of Thorne's fraud, and we start with the McDonalds and the Kowalskis. Her final word was for her own farm. My father is safe, but my farm is still legally compromised by Henderson's deed. I have used the money to save my father's life, but I owe the association a different kind of debt now. The Vance farm will be the symbol. We will fight Henderson's deed in court, proving that the betrayal was the heart of Thorne's conspiracy. We will not just save the farms, we will reclaim the pride that Thorne stole with his transactional lies. The allies nodded, the exhaustion of the battle giving way to the grinding determination of the long war ahead. The political victory was achieved, but the economic and legal fight, the silence after the thunder, was just beginning. They had won the war of courage, but now they faced the war of paperwork. Ilara knew her journey wasn't over. She would ride back to the city to be with her father, armed with the knowledge that the sacrifice had been worthwhile. She had saved his life, and now she would use her freedom and her truth to secure the future of the community he had failed to save alone. The heavy hand was broken, but the wounds it inflicted would take years to heal. The unyielding soil remained, ready for a new planting.
2 years had passed since the final stand at dawn. The immediate, intense pressure that had defined Ilara Vance's life had subsided, replaced by the steady, demanding rhythm of rebuilding. A rhythm born of hard-won victory and enduring sacrifice. The echoes of the new world were palpable across Havenwood. The legacy of the land. The most visible change was the land itself. Though the dust storm still raged with terrifying intensity each spring, the farmers were prepared, united, and pragmatic. They had adopted new methods, planting shelter belts of drought-resistant trees, rotating crops, and, most importantly, sharing resources. The individual stoic isolation of the old guard had been permanently replaced by the practical solidarity of the new world. The land bank's power was irrevocably broken. Following Coster's testimony and the forensic accounting enabled by Ilara's recovered knowledge, the charges against Silas Thorne were expanded, and the land bank was forced into a massive settlement. The Pinnacle Assets Consortium was dismantled, and a federal court order mandated the restructuring of all Havenwood area mortgages. Evictions stopped entirely. The McDonalds and the Kowalskis received clear, settled deeds to their land. The fates of the Allies. The core members of the resistance had returned to their lives, but their roles were permanently shifted. Frank Miller became the first elected president of the reorganized Havenwood Farmers Cooperative. He dedicated his life to political lobbying, ensuring that the government's relief programs reached the farmers, not the banks. Deputy Dale Coster resigned from the sheriff's office. Though his decision cost him his career, he found quiet dignity working as a supervisor for the new Federal Civilian Conservation Corps camp established nearby. He was a symbol of institutional conscience. Agnes, the former county clerk, was fully exonerated and became the co-op's chief bookkeeper, maintaining meticulously honest records, a lasting tribute to the power of truth. Mr. Goldfarb's pawn shop reopened. Though he never fully trusted the new world, his quiet support for the community remained a beacon of unwavering solidarity. And then there was Daniel Hayes. Released from custody within a month of Coster's testimony, Daniel never forgot Ilara's devastating compromise to save her father. Though he understood the necessity, the cost of knowing remained a shadow between them. He chose to continue his organizing work, using the Havenwood success story as a blueprint across the Midwest. He was a traveling echo of their struggle, a voice of the new world, visiting Havenwood every few months, a relationship of partnership, not permanence. Ilara Vance, the unyielding root. Ilara's life had been the most profoundly altered, defined by the dual success and the devastating personal price she paid. Her father, Thomas Vance, never fully recovered from the dust pneumonia. Though he survived and returned from the city clinic, the illness had stolen his strength. He was no longer the man of unyielding soil who fought his battles alone. He was quiet, reliant on his children, and haunted by the shame of his secret transaction with Henderson. The final closure came in the long, arduous legal battle over the 80 acres he had sold. Using the now cooperative county records and Coster's testimony, Ilara won the suit, proving the sale to Elias Henderson was a transaction made under duress and coercion by Thorne, rendering the deed void. Henderson, stripped of his ill-gotten gains, fled the region, a final hollow echo of the transactional enemy. Ilara had saved her family's entire 300 acres, reclaiming the physical land and, more importantly, her father's dignity. She took over the full operation of the farm. She was no longer just the determined daughter, she was the farmer. Her hands were calloused, her face weathered, but her eyes held a steady, strategic clarity that came from facing down both a banker and death. One evening, Ilara sat on the porch swing beside her father, the air unusually clear after a recent rain. "The farm is safe, Papa," she said, looking out at the young green saplings they had planted as shelter belts, the first physical signs of the new world. Thomas smiled faintly, a peaceful look she hadn't seen in years. "It was never about the dirt, Ilara. It was about the name Vance. You kept it honest." I learned that the name means nothing if you stand alone. We were saved by neighbors, by a Jewish shopkeeper, by a city union man, and by a good cop. The new strength is the community, not the single hand. Thomas nodded, a final profound acknowledgement of the end of the old guard's era. The enduring legacy. The farm thrived under Ilara's pragmatic collective leadership. She managed the finances, worked with the co-op, and crucially became the local chapter's chief political advisor, using her knowledge of bureaucratic weaknesses to protect the members. The story concludes with Ilara looking out over her land. The broken plowshare, the first symbol of her individual struggle, was long since repaired and put to good use. But the real legacy of the struggle was the permanent, public commitment to collective defense. The final echo was not the roaring wind of the dust, but the sound of the Havenwood Co-op's weekly meeting, held now not in a secret derelict schoolhouse, but openly, proudly,
in the town hall. Ilara Vance, the farm girl who had risked everything, had not only saved her own unyielding soil, but had planted the seeds of a resilient, organized new world in the heart of the Depression-era American plains. Her struggle proved that even in the face of insurmountable systemic corruption and natural disaster, courage, clarity, and genuine solidarity could prevail. The whispers of the old guard had faded, replaced by the steady, strong voice of the collective.